Okay, there we go. All right, let that okay. Well, welcome everybody to our Indivisible Greater Grand Rapids webinar on the current economy and how it affects you. Our speaker tonight is Professor Paul Isely, who is currently the Associate Dean and Professor of Economics at Grand Valley State University. He has many professional publications, and his research focuses on the economic drivers of West Michigan, the economic effects of technological change and environmental evaluations. He also leads the forecast team at GVSU for the Seidman College of Business, and he has been interviewed in the media hundreds of times to talk about the West Michigan economy. So, Paul, welcome to our webinar.
Excellent. Thank you.
And just a few housekeeping things. We do have a chat going on. So if you do have questions, please do put questions in the chat. And when Paul is done with his presentation, we will open it up for questions. So I think we are going to get going here. So Paul, if you want to share your slides and put those up, that'd be great.
Great. So we're going to go here. Come on. There. Excellent. So are you seeing the slide?
We are. You're good to
All
go.
right. So it's my job in a relatively short amount of time to help you understand how the economy is behaving right now and where it's heading to. Come on. Uh-oh. We started it too early. I need to back out and fix this. So I'm going to turn this off. Come on. There we go. And then I'm going to go here and hit share. Come on. We tested this ahead of time, just like always. Share entire screen. Share.
All right.
And then I'm going to do from beginning. Come on. From beginning. There we go. Now you got it, right?
Yep, we got it. We are all good to go.
Okay. So we always start my presentations by telling you how my team has done. And remember, there's more than just me. There is a team. Um, and so what this does is take my January forecast for employment in West Michigan for the next January. So we're looking 1 year out. And when we get to the end of the year, I subtract what actually happened from what the prediction was. So when this is zero, my team was exactly right. So you can say pretty much zero, pretty much zero, pretty much zero. January of 2020, we didn't quite guess what COVID was. That didn't start to become apparent until a few months later. Not embarrassed about that. Um, and then here at the end, you can see that we're starting to move off of zero just a little bit. So our forecasts are drifting just a little bit. The black and the orange lines are how accurate the US government counts employed people. So we're still statistically correct, but it's starting to slow down a little bit more than what we expect. So why is that happening? What's happening that's making that happen? And what's happening is one thing. So once we took a little bit of time to look at stuff this year, there was one thing that if I change it, brings us back down to the exact number. And that one thing is that when we started 2020, we took President Trump at his word that he was going to do something called reciprocal tariffs. All right. And a reciprocal tariff would have come in at about 5%. Okay. Uh, our trade weighted at this point is nearly 15%. And in April, we were close to 30%. So the tariffs are 3 to 6 times higher than what we modeled at the beginning of the year. If you bring those in to the correct level, it slows the economy down by about a full percentage point, and that brings us back in line. So if we had known that at the beginning of the year, we would have been able to dial it in. Okay? So our word for the last year is uncertainty, and our word for this year is slow. All right. So, so to do that, I'm going to walk through consumers. I'm going to walk through what businesses are seeing and how that's affecting some things. All right. Particularly here in West Michigan. We're going to walk through some of the nuances or some of the major drivers out there that you're thinking about, like tariffs and AI. And we're going to spend a little bit of time with real estate before we get to the end. Okay.
Mhm.
So the consumer is maxed out and they're unhappy. So this is the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. Okay, and we've broken it apart by party. And I've done this to help you see why we don't ask Republicans or Democrats how they feel about the economy, because they can't tell us. All right. So if you look at this, the question is, how is the current economy? How confident are you in the current economy? Okay. So before November of last year, Democrats were very happy, and Republicans, I did blue and red to help you see it. Every now and then I want to switch them just to get people confused. And Republicans were really unhappy. All right. Then the election happened. And in 1 month, magically, the economy changed completely. And Democrats were now unhappy and Republicans were happy. All right. There are easier ways to tell who's president of the United States than to ask people how confident they are in the economy. So we don't really look at those. We want to break it out to the independents, which is the gray line that you see there. And the independents have been pretty unhappy for a long time, if you didn't know that. But what's really interesting here is that they're now more unhappy than they've been at any point since U of M started breaking it out by party in 1980. All right. And in fact, if you add them all together, if you add them all together, there's only one time since 1950 where the totality of confidence is lower than it is right now. All right. So people are really unhappy about the economy. That doesn't mean the economy is going to slow down because Americans, when they're unhappy, spend money. And so we see that happening as well. Right. Now, you may have heard something called the K-shaped recovery. I don't like that. It doesn't mean anything to me. So let's just sort of look at this here. What the K-shaped economy is trying to tell you is that there's a group of people that aren't seeing a recovery and a group of people who are. And if we break it out by income, so on the far left is the bottom 10% of income, on the far right is the top percentage of income. Okay. Orange is your after-tax income, gray is your expenditures. This does not include government subsidies and things like that. Okay. And what you can see is you really have to get basically to the 70th percentile before you clearly have income ahead of expenditures. All right. That's a big deal. So what we're seeing right now in the United States is you basically have to make $100,000 a year in order to have a safety fund. All right. And there's two reasons for that. All right. If you ask people, they'll tell you the reason that they're struggling right now is prices went up. And because prices went up, they can't maintain what they want to buy. The problem with that is between 2018 and now, income actually went up faster than inflation. All right. So part of this story is that these people aren't earning enough money. But the other one is a COVID story. All right. Before COVID, people were consuming a certain amount. And then during COVID, they couldn't spend it. And people in the bottom 50% were showered with money from the government. All right. In fact, the bottom 50% added 2 trillion to their net worth the first year of COVID. All right. That's a lot of money. And they came out of COVID and they're like, oh man, I want to spend money. So instead of spending here, they started spending higher. And we called that revenge spending. right? You made me stay at home. I'm going to spend money now. The bad news, the bad news is they didn't come back down after they increased their spending. All right. So we've reset what is normal spending to a higher amount than what people were spending before COVID. And that's exacerbating this problem. All right. But what it means is that if you're selling to the bottom 70%, they're struggling to make ends meet. And if you're selling to the top 30%, they're better off than they've ever been. And they're better off because they're not income driven, they're wealth driven. And the stock market's done just fine, and their real estate has done just fine. And so this top end group is willing to spend money. And that's what makes that GDP number look good, is that this top group is spending so much money that the GDP looks good, even though the majority of Americans are actually struggling a little bit right now. All right. So we can see this because a lot of those low, by the way, always, if you want to exaggerate things, how income disparity, you compare the 100th percentile to the 10th percentile. You should never do that. Okay, you should never do that. Why? If you look at the 10th percentile, they make about 5,000 a year and they spend about 25 to 30,000 a year. Who can do that? College students. All right. So for the
Mhm.
first 10 years of me being an adult, I was in the bottom 10% of income. I have never been poor. All right. And so using that bottom 10% exaggerates a little bit the concept of a working poor. And so economists tend to look at the 20th to 30th percentiles. All right. And we sort of ignore the top percentile because whether Elon Musk has $5 billion dollars or $20 billion dollars just doesn't matter. All right. It's more money than they're going to be able to spend. So people tend to compare the 90th to the 80th to the 20th if you want to do things well. That's an aside, really technical. You probably didn't need that. All right. So what do we see? We know that these that people are struggling, and a lot of those lower income people are younger. All right. So this is transitioning from to being late on your automobile. Okay, meaning you weren't late paying for your automobile loan, and now you're 90 days late. So it's transitioning to being late. It's not the total number of people who are; it's how fast people are getting late. And what you can see here and what's important to look at is not only is it high right now, but if you go back in time, basically we're seeing car defaults at the same rate that we saw in 2009, right? 2009 was a pretty deep recession. We're not seeing that in houses because houses have still higher in value. So in 2009, people couldn't get out of their house because it dropped in value below the value of their mortgage. Now, if you get in trouble, you can sell your house and pay off your mortgage. And so we're not seeing defaults on houses, even though they've inched up a little bit, become a problem. But this tells me people are struggling. So we have an entire group of people who are struggling, and what's happened? They become really price sensitive. All right. So if you look at this group here, you can see this entire pile of different restaurants. Okay. And you see the vast majority through the first part of last year had reductions in their sales year over year. I mean, Pizza Hut's been reducing for like 2 decades, but um, if you look at this, all of these were doing worse, except for that very top end group. What did they do differently? Right away, they went hard in on value and low price, right? And it wasn't until the end of the year that McDonald's figured it out and brought back their $5 meal. All right. So what we saw is that the consumer was so price sensitive that only corporations that responded to that were seeing sales gains, right? So, all All right. So I did Holland this morning, and so I'm going to do the Holland slides here because it's so cool. But realize the story works for Kent County too, just not quite as drastic. Okay. What I want you to see here is in Holland, they are very manufacturing oriented. We are here in Kent County as well, just not quite as high. And you can see basically a third of the workers in Ottawa County work in manufacturing. And you thought it was selling ice cream at Grand Haven, but no, it's manufacturing. They build things. In fact, in my car, the cylinders in my car were made just outside Grand Haven. All right. But 44% of the income goes to that group. Okay, so 44% of all the money earned by workers in Ottawa County went to manufacturers. Okay. Now, if you look at this next group here, accommodation and food service, retail trade, healthcare, and construction, they add up to about a third of the workforce, but they only have 22% of the income. In other words, these manufacturing workers are making twice as much annually as the workers in these other trades. That's a big deal. All right. And you'll
Mhm.
see accommodation and food service is among the worst because you can see that orange bar is really small compared to that blue bar. Why does that matter? This is what we've seen happening. All right. Manufacturing jobs have been dropping. In fact, over the last year, the Grand Rapids statistical area has lost 3,000 manufacturing jobs. Over the last 2 years, it's lost 6,000. Michigan is down more than 20,000 manufacturing jobs. All right. And we're replacing those jobs. Look at this. We're replacing those jobs with those low income accommodation and food service jobs.
Mhm.
So your unemployment is staying pretty nice, but what we're doing is we're trading off high income jobs for low income jobs. And that's happening for two reasons. Number one, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether they should build internal combustion engine cars or EVs. So they're not quite sure how to invest. And those that invested in EVs are getting hammered right now. So
Mhm.
they're not quite sure what to do. The second thing that's happened is because there were so few workers who wanted to do this type of job, they invested a lot in automation. So we don't need as many workers anymore. But if we think about our workers, this is a big gap for us. And it's causing some problems, particularly on that bottom group. Think about this. In the United States, over the last 2 years, more than a third of the jobs created were second jobs. And I'm here to tell you, people don't add DoorDash to their portfolio of jobs because it's
Mhm.
fun. They add it because they have to pay some bills. All right. So this is my really complicated squiggly line graph. I do that so you know I have a PhD and I'm really smart. But it tells a really nice story for you here. So the orange is the long run trend. The blue is the short run trend. So when blue is above orange, things are getting better. When blue is below orange, things are getting worse. All right. So if you go here to the last 2 years, you see a lot of volatility, and that volatility is because of uncertainty around EVs. And then at the end of 24, when President Trump was elected, you can see that new orders went up. Right. And these are West Michigan things. We survey West Michigan businesses. And that stayed up until about the middle of the year. And about July, those tariffs really started to bite. And since they started to bite, you see those new orders drop and drop and drop.
Mhm.
All right. And so we ended the year much weaker than we were in the middle part of the year. Right. That's a big deal for us because manufacturing is such a large part of our wealth here in West Michigan. Okay. Housing. You ever notice this? We had consumers slowing, we had businesses slowing, now we have housing slowing. So let's look at this really quick here. And what you can see here is I have the three counties here in West Michigan, and you can see that they went down in value after the Great Recession in 2009, and then they came up a little faster than they did before. Why did they go up a little faster? Because we had a lot of millennials who wanted to buy houses, and they really pushed up how fast house prices went up. In fact, you'll hear millennials complain about, a lot about housing prices. The sad thing is, the reason housing prices went up was because there were so many of them trying to buy houses.
Mhm.
So a lot of it had to do with the demographics. Then you see after COVID, you see that hockey stick where prices went up really fast. Those went up really fast because interest rates were really low and inflation was really high. All right. There's something called a real interest rate where you take the interest rate and subtract the inflation rate. Why do you do that? Because if you hold a dollar bill and it devalues during the course of the year and you pay off a loan at the end of the year with that, you're paying it with money that's worth less. So the real interest rate during 2002 was negative. The interest rate was 3%. The inflation rate was 8%. When you have a negative real interest rate, you actually gain value by borrowing money. Sorry, Dave Ramsey, but that's how it works. Okay. Sometimes borrowing money actually makes you money. And my wife continues to ask why we don't pay off our mortgage rate. We don't pay off our mortgage here because I have negative real interest rates still, and I'm making money by borrowing money. Okay. And then after that, you can see that it's slowed down. And that's happening because of because now the prices have gotten high enough that they're harder to go up faster. Okay. And you can see it with rents too. By the way, these are just houses in the middle. We've gotten rid of those bad houses in downtown Grand Rapids, and we've gotten rid of those rich houses in Ada. All right. These are houses, mid-range houses. These are mid-range rentals. By the way, both of these things were Zillow data. This is when I have to do the quick disclaimer. Use Zillow to understand how a market is changing. Do not use Zillow to find the price of your house. All right. So Zillow decided that their model worked so good that they bought thousands of houses based on their model. Do you know what happened?
Mhm.
They almost went bankrupt. If there's ever an elegant proof that it's not accurate enough for a house, that's it. Okay. And here, what you can see is in West Michigan, we have seen the increases in rental rates now drop down to just above the rate of inflation. So, all that building you're seeing in downtown Grand Rapids is starting to have an effect on how fast rental rates are going up. So we're starting to catch up a little bit. Right now, we're building houses. We're building house doors. So rentals, multifamilies, whatever. We're building housing units faster than the population is growing. In fact, about twice as fast as the population is growing. But we can do that because we already had a shortage. We're a little worried about housing value in about 5 years because those millennials will be done. All right. The baby boomers will be starting to exit their houses at faster numbers. So the demographics turns away from housing prices as we get into the 2030s, which sort of sucks because that's about when I want to sell my house. But nonetheless, all right. Now, what about interest rates? Because those matter for all of this. Okay. You may have heard President Trump complain about Powell, right? Anybody hear that?
Mhm.
Probably you've heard that, right? And he gripes and gripes and gripes that Powell is stupid and isn't dropping the interest rates fast enough. Here's the dirty little secret. President Trump controls the interest rates, not Jerome Powell. All right. Huh? Wait a minute. I thought the Federal Reserve controlled the interest rates. Well, let's think about this. The Federal Reserve affects the rate that banks charge each other. All right. It's called the Fed funds rate. And each of these red lines was a cut in the interest rates by the Federal Reserve. In fact, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates since September of 2024 by 1.75 points. Okay? 1.75 percentage points. But over that time, we dropped from about 6.8 to about 6.2. We dropped by only point by only less than half of that, about a third of it. All right. Why? Because the saber rattling over tariffs, the talking mean about other countries, and we do talk mean about other countries, all right, and threatening the Federal Reserve has made it so other people in other countries don't want to save their money here in the United States anymore.
Mm,
Okay. It's
mm,
called de-dollarization. And it was going to happen over the next 10 years anyways, but we made it happen in 3 months. All right. So, so what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, because so many people saved their money in the United States, it drove down our interest rates below what people in the rest of the world got. But now you may have heard things like gold has gone up in value and things like that's because they're trying to get out of the dollar. And we're seeing that happen around the world. All right. This will mean that no matter what interest rate you see for the next 20 years, if we hadn't done this, the interest rate would be a full percentage point lower. All right. We will be paying higher interest rates from now on out because we've given up this status as the safe place to save your money. Okay. Um, yeah. And we're going to act a lot more like Germany. This is a big deal. It's something that we worry an awful lot about. And we expect interest rates to drop more this coming year. They're going to go down more. They're just not going to go down as far as they would have gone if we hadn't done this. All right. So let's do two other quick disruptors. All right. The first one is tariffs. So has anybody heard that the foreign countries are going to pay the tariff?
mhm.
It's something that's consistently stated, and it's wrong. They are not. Okay. How do we know this? This is a cool graph. I've been showing this graph now for several months. Nicely, in the last 2 weeks, MIT just released a paper that confirms that what I'm saying here is correct. All right. So if a foreign country is going to pay for the tariff, they have to do it by reducing their price. A tariff is like a sales tax. All right. And if a merchant wants to reduce your sales tax, they can't pay your sales tax. What they have to do is reduce the price of their good. So if you look at this blue line, that's the price they're charging us. And you would expect at the end of 2024, if if they were paying it, you would see a drop of 5, 10, or 15 percentage points. You don't. You
Mm,
see it keep going up. All right. You do see a small drop here in China. So on the bottom line, the orange one, if you go to when the tariffs start here, right close to 2025, you see that little dip down?
mhm.
They're paying 3 percentage points. At that moment in time, China's tariff rate was 30%, and the Chinese were paying 3% of it. So 10% of the tariff was being paid by China at that moment in time. So if the foreign countries aren't paying it, it must be us, right? Because my prices are going up, I'm feeling really bad and everything. You're wrong again.
Ah,
All right. Why do we know that? Look at the gray line. This is the prices that we're paying. If the tariffs increased our prices faster, you would expect just when that Chinese number dipped down, our prices would go up. But they don't go up any faster than they were going up before. That's just normal inflation. So who's paying it? US corporations are paying it. They're eating the cost. All right. And we're seeing a drop in their profit margins. And because there's a drop in their profit margins and it's decreasing their profitability, they have to do something. And what are they doing? They're reducing cost. And what's the way that you reduce cost? You find a lot of people who look a lot like me, middle-aged, well, I'm not middle-aged anymore, but I'm going to declare middle-aged. All right. People who are middle managers, and you're going to get rid of them. You're going to say, I'm getting rid of them because of AI. No, you're not. You're getting rid of them because you have cost pressures, but you're going to blame AI because it feels better. So what
Mm.
we're seeing right now is no evidence that middle managers are being replaced by AI, but we're seeing a lot of evidence that they're being replaced for the good old reason of cutting costs. Okay? All right, so that's tariffs. Companies are paying the tariffs in the United States, and that's affecting employment. So what about AI? AI is disrupting some jobs, and they're entry-level jobs. Okay? And so what you can see here is the blue bar is is the 2 years prior to ChatGPT being released, and the orange is the 2 years after. And what you can see is call centers are down 25% over the 2 years since ChatGPT was released. Programming down 5%. If you think about college graduates, the highest unemployment is computer science majors, all
Mm.
right, among
Mm.
new graduates. Advertising agencies, you will never see uh, another listing for a house written by a human. They use AI for all of it. And so you no longer need the person to do that. So what we're seeing is some work. Now, only 10% of firms are using AI right now to reduce their headcount, but that will pick up over the course of the next year or so. And in fact, this year we expect that by the end of the year, you'll start to see more insurance and finance jobs lost. So by the end of the year, it's highly likely that AI will decide whether you get to have that surgery or not. Uh, and and so that's where we're heading right now. Okay. Now, AI has made Donald Trump the luckiest president in all time, right? Lucky, lucky, lucky. Why? Because the tariffs right now are taking $350 billion out of the US economy. In fact, even President Trump tells us that it is, because he said he collected $350 billion in tariff revenue, and he hasn't spent it. So that means it's reducing our GDP by that much. Okay? But AI, just this last year for data centers, for the top four firms, spent $350 billion just on data centers. If you add in all the other stuff that AI is doing, it adds 2% to GDP. Now, last year, GDP grew at 2%. If AI spending wasn't happening, we would be in a recession right now. But what it is doing is it's sucking all that investment into a very narrow group of our economy. And it's hiding the fact that there's weakness in many other parts of the economy. It's also made your 401k look really good, but it's from a very narrow sector. And so it's very, very risky right now. What we do know is that AI is over investing. They're over investing right now because they want to win the race. All right. Just like in the 1990s, you have to spend now. If you don't spend now, you will not be the provider of AI 5 years from now. And you got to spend like there's no tomorrow. And that's what they're doing. Okay. Why? Because they don't want to be Netscape. They want to be Google. Does anybody remember Netscape?
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Most of the people I saw in here were old enough that they should. I can guarantee you none of my students know what Netscape is. They've never heard of it ever before. All right. Why? Because they didn't spend enough money to outcompete Microsoft and Google. That's what's happening right now. That's why we believe that that is a bubble. And right now it appears to be about 3 times higher than what we saw in the 1990s. Okay. So overall, so what's going to happen now is in the second half of the year, we actually expect things to speed up. Okay. Why do we know that? Because a lot of what's happening at the federal government level is designed to have things speed up in the second half of the year. All right. Now, if I were cynical, I'd say, well, why would they want the second half of the year? Hmm, could be the midterms. I don't know.
Maybe.
Um, but nonetheless, um, so what do we see here? In the middle of next year, we're going to start to see interest rates cut, but it won't happen very much until we get after May. Powell will no longer be chair of the Federal Reserve in May, even if nothing else happens. Donald Trump is replacing hawks, and a hawk on the Federal Reserve is worried about prices with doves. Doves worry about unemployment. So what happens? Interest rates will drop faster in the second half of the year because of the composition of the Federal Reserve. And it will probably drop faster than it should. Okay. If you're somebody who lives on a fixed income, this will be bad in the second half of the year because interest rates will drop below the inflation rate and your CDs will no longer keep up with inflation. Okay.
Mhm.
It also expect that we'll see refinancing because somewhere between 5 and 6% is where we'll see mortgage rates by the end of summer, probably. Okay. And what that means is Americans in their glory will go out and refi their houses. And when they refi their house like good Americans, they'll take equity out and spend it. All right. The initial reactions to the tariff will be done. The big reaction to the tariff was in June, July, and August. So by the time I get to August of next year, we'll be comparing to a really bad time. So the effects of the tariffs year over year will actually improve as we go through this year because we'll be comparing to really bad tariffs from a year ago. All right. So those initial reactions to the tariff will be done. The tax cuts from the big beautiful bill. I have to call it the big beautiful bill because that's its name. Okay. I also had to use the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the name that Joe Biden gave to his bill. Both of them were misnomers to what the bill was, but nonetheless, the tax cuts from the big beautiful bill really begin to affect choices during the summer. We'll start to see those tax cuts start to affect how people spend money in the summer. And that AI investment, we talked about $350 billion in CapEx. Right now, they're planning to spend twice as much this year. So as we get into the second half of the year, we expect the economy to speed up just a little bit. The downside to that is we expect those finance and insurance jobs with AI to retrench as we get to the second half of the year. But I think that the expansionary effects will be greater than the restrictive ones. Okay. So what are the takeaways? Consumers are still stressed and they're starting to freak out, right? Why that matters is if anything bad happens, they'll pull back more. Tariffs began to create measurable effects in July, which means that the drag on the economy will happen for 1 year from that, and then it will start to lighten as we go through the second half of next year. AI increases in productivity are making us better off unless you're somebody who lost their job. Interest rates will be higher than they would have been because of de-dollarization, even if the Fed cuts. But understand, interest rates will still go down this year, and they're going to go down by another 50 to 100 basis points, a half to a full percentage point by the end of the year. If you want to take risky investments, look to red areas, don't look to blue areas. Democrats are really unhappy about the economy and aren't willing to take risk. Republicans are really happy about the economy and are willing to take risks. So if you want to do business investment, look to red areas. Population growth continues to support housing in West Michigan for the next 5 years, but after that, all bets are off. The young population's financial stress is going to leave them in rentals longer. Um, so that's something we have to think about. And because of all the things I'm talking about, that faster pace that we're talking in the second half of the year, those interest rates lowering faster than I said, were probably prudent, means that prices are going to continue to pop along closer to 3%. All right. And so that is what we're seeing right now. And I believe that brings me to the end. And it lets us come back to seeing if there are any questions.
Yes, we've got a couple of them. Um, and I think you touched a little bit on this, this USD dollarization.
Hmm.
Um, are other countries it sounds like, is this a mass movement to turn away from wanting the US dollar? How do you see that shaken out? And
Yeah,
what
I mean,
impact would that have on our economy?
well, what it means is they're not saving their money here. All right. And because they're
Mhm.
not saving their money here, it increases our interest rates. Because the more savings there are, the lower the interest rate is. Um, we knew that this was going to happen over time, anyways. It just happened much faster than we thought it would. And so countries are loading up on the euro. They're loading up on Asian currencies. They're loading up on gold. Individual investors are doing the same thing. And in fact, for the first time in my life, treasuries, US treasuries, are acting like risky assets. So it
Mm,
means when risky things happen in the world, people used to run to the US debt to make sure that their money was safe, and now they're running from it. So that's been a change that's happened.
okay. Have another question here. So, um, many people equate, and we hear this all the time, they equate the stock market and the economy as kind of the same thing, right? And,
Hmm.
you know, we see prices going up, but we hear people saying, yeah, but my portfolio is doing really well.
Hmm.
Um, do you have a comment on that?
So so we can note definitively that the stock market is not the economy. Okay. The stock market looks at the value of a company over the next 10 years. Um, the economy goes up and down all the time. So what
Hmm.
we're betting on is that over the next 10 years, these companies are going to be worth more. All right.
Hmm.
That's the fundamental. But it doesn't tell us what's happening in a given year. So the stock market's not a very good marker for what's happening in the real economy. And,
Okay.
and it should never be used that way.
Okay. And I was intrigued by this comment you made about the big, beautiful bill, how it's going to affect choices.
Mhm.
Could you expand a bit on that? What sorts of choices are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's going to change the way people invest. It's going to change the way people give money to nonprofits. In fact, you probably noted that there was tax benefits to getting stuff out this December versus next year.
Hmm.
Um, it's going to change the ability to move money between corporations and things. And so it's going to result in more money to spend, all right, at least instantaneously. It'll result in a higher deficit, all right. We definitively know that. And we know the deficit is getting into that red zone. So I consider debt to GDP ratio below 60% green, between 60 and 100% yellow, above 100% red. And we've moved into that above 100% range. And one thing we've done very bad after COVID And both parties have been very bad at this as they continue to overspend.
Mhm.
And we have lots of Americans who want that money and they're giving it to them, but eventually it will catch up. And it will catch up by resulting in higher interest rates for all of us and reduced choices and probably some problems with maintaining some of our social safety nets, the way that we're seeing happen right now in France. So, so they've let their debt get up to that level, and it's now affecting their ability to support their retirees and make the promises that they've kept.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, the price increases continuing.
Mhm,
What do you see? You talked about comparing the bottom 20th percentile to the 80th
mhm,
percentile.
mhm,
We continue to see price increases.
mhm.
How significant do you think those price increases are going to be? And what is that going to do to the disparity between the 20th percentile and the 80th percentile?
Well, if we look over the last few years, what's affecting people at the very bottom is food. The
Mhm.
next tier, it's housing. And then if you look at the most wealthy, it's automotive. Um, and so which of those things are necessities versus wants? And so what we're seeing are those necessities are affecting the bottom end, and affecting what's happening to their ability to find food, shelter, and clothing. So we're seeing a lot of demand at food banks, and we expect that that will continue to rise as we go through the first half of this year.
Mhm. And I wanted to have you touch on the impact of healthcare premiums because
Mhm.
you just said the lowest 20th percentile, right? There was going to be more pain there. But
Mhm.
I am seeing within more of that 40, 50, 60 percentile, people having to make choices when it comes to insurance for themselves. So
Right.
we've heard discussions from things like, well, should I insure me or should I insure my kids? Okay,
Mhm.
well, what is my husband doing? Is he in a job where he's a high chance of getting injured or sick or something?
Right.
Um, and it doesn't seem like we're seeing much relief in that area.
Nope, nope, and we won't with the changes that are there. So we
Right.
expect we expect healthcare premiums to go up. We expect total coverage to go down. Um, I don't think you need an economist to tell you that.
Right.
Um,
And we worry too about rural hospitals and those sorts of things,
yeah,
that
yeah.
but
But
ultimately
rural
pay.
hospitals were dying anyways, and they just speeding it up. You know, the healthcare sector isn't very profitable right now. Insurance companies on the healthcare side are losing billions of dollars every year. And to try and avoid that, we're seeing them merge together. And as they merge together, it allows them to increase their prices,
Hmm.
um, because
Hmm.
there's less competition.
Right.
So we
Right.
see that happening, and it's happened in many, many places. But one of the interesting things we know is that if you can increase coverage, interesting things happen. Um, so when we studied the increase in access to, I always mix Medicaid and Medicare up, but when we increased access coming out of COVID, and there was that expansion, we were able to study what happened. And one of the great things that happened in Oregon from an economic standpoint is they didn't have enough money for the expansion for everybody. So they did a lottery, and half the people got improved health care and half didn't. And so we
Mm-hmm.
were able to actually, not me, but economists were actually able to trace what happened to each group. And interestingly enough, what they found was that it actually, both groups continue to have basically the same health. All right. The one marker, there was two markers that were different for them. One was substantially reduced depression for the group that had health care because they probably weren't spending time worrying about it. And the second thing was that it increased their incomes. because once they had health care, they weren't frozen to a particular job and they could move around and find a job that paid them more. And so
Hmm.
we actually saw incomes go up. And that was a really exciting thing. And then U of M redid that with Michigan data and found the same thing. So
Interesting.
it was a very interesting set of results.
Okay. You haven't really touched on the national debt. We
Mhm.
see that going up fairly significantly. How does that impact the economy?
Well, it's going to impact the economy through interest rates. So what's
Mhm.
happening is the government borrowing money is crowding out the ability for me to borrow money. Because if they borrow it, I can't borrow it. And so for me to borrow it, I now have to compete with more and more people, and I have to pay a higher interest rate in order to do it. So that's the first place it will start showing up. Okay.
Interesting.
And then it will start constraining our ability to do things because that debt now is becoming a larger and larger proportion of our spending because you have to do debt service.
Hmm.
So it will affect our ability to provide social safety nets, national defense, and uh, and anything else the government does.
Okay. We had a question pop up. What happens to the economy when the AI bubble busts?
Yeah. Um, well, it depends on which company you own, because
Yeah.
not all companies are gonna bust. So what's gonna happen? There's gonna be a drop in wealth, all right, and that drop in wealth will slow the economy down. So in some ways, the end of the internet bubble uh, gave us the Y2K recession in the early 2000s. These recessions tend to be a little lighter because remember, 70% of the economy, 70% of the people have no wealth and aren't in the stock market. So a drop in the stock market really doesn't affect them. It's now going to affect that group on the top a lot more than it affects the group on the bottom. Um, but right now, that group is the group that's spending. So it will
Hmm.
slow down the entire economy, but not as much as you might think. But
You know,
what it
we
will do is make all of our retirements a little bit worse for a while.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what we saw at the holidays was the people in the top percentile were actually increasing their holiday spending quite a bit, whereas the lower percentiles were not. And so it still looked like we had a good holiday season from a
Yep.
sales perspective. And it's a
Yep.
little misleading unless you look at those lower pieces. I think we have time for one more question. Um, and I'm going to go with this one. What do you think is the probability of the Trump administration implementing a mandatory defined contribution annuitation retirement plan? I don't know if that sounds like, is that a different thing to replace Social Security? So,
Yeah.
but that's
So,
something that many of us worry about, right?
yeah. Um, well, the short answer is there's no way for us to abandon Social Security because Social Security, uh, despite the fact everybody believes they're paying into Social Security, they are not. They're paying current retirees. And it was designed, so if you go back to when Social Security started, uh, there were 15 workers for every retiree. And
Hmm.
the average retiree died 5 years before they could collect Social Security. All right. Now there is 1.5 workers for every retiree. And and the average retiree lives uh, 20 years past their retirement. So, so the economics have gotten bad.
Hmm.
But even if we wanted to switch now, we can't because we're sort of trapped. Because to switch now would mean that group who's paying in can't pay in because they're paying into a defined contribution plan. Okay. So if we make that switch, then what we're doing is abandoning a
Hmm.
lot of voters. Um,
Oh, actually, I'll jump in. I think it's actually supposed to be a supplemental plan.
Yep.
that's supposed to like it's supposed to they're actually trying to implement like, a hybrid
Yep.
situation.
Yeah, I think that there's a desire to do that. I'm not sure there's the money to do that because in order to make effective use of that, the only group that can do that right now is the top 30%.
Mhm.
So yes,
Oh, well, based on what the plan is supposed to be, it's actually supposed to be somewhere between a 6 to 15% employer-based
yeah,
contribution, right? So
yeah,
it basically, I think he's trying to create. I mean, what is it? How much assets under management right now does the U.S. hold? It's like around like $30 trillion, right, or something
yeah,
like that, right? So I think he's trying to create that, that new asset class to give his friends to manage.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think that there's operationally, it's very tricky to make it happen. So I'm not holding my breath on that one. Uh,
Okay.
I'm, and it's not a winner. I mean, it's not a winner for the midterms for them. All
That's
right.
true.
So if we think about the winners that he's going to need, he needs to reduce prices someplace. He needs to have a win there. Um, he needs to have employment pick up a little bit and understand that you know, they're messing around a bit with those numbers right now, and the error bar on those numbers have gotten bigger. They have 40% fewer people collecting employment numbers now, so those numbers are weaker than they used to be.
Hmm.
But what he's not understanding is just because we don't have a good number for unemployment, people know whether unemployment's high or not. I don't actually need the number to tell me if my neighbor's unemployed.
Okay.
So he needs to do that. So I think that if they go down this route, it's going to take an awful lot of political capital. They're going to need that political capital for some of those other things. So I don't think it's a high probability. That doesn't mean it won't happen. I just don't think it's a high probability.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this. We had some good questions. Appreciated the knowledge that you shared with us. So thank you from us.
Mhm.
I do just want to share a couple of things that are coming up, some upcoming events. So our next Indivisible Greater Grand Rapids members and friends meeting will be on Monday, January 26th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. It'll be at Fountain Street Church. We'll have a performance by the Grand Rapids Girls Choral Academy to kick things off, and we'll be presenting our 2026 strategic plan. You can see some other things on here. Continue to follow us on Facebook. If you're getting our newsletter, we'll be pushing these events out as well. But thank you all for joining us tonight and wishing you all a good week. Thank you.